Good evening, my name is Brad and I'm an alcoholic. So most of us will remember Groundhog Day and Bill Murray's struggles through the 2 hours of that movie. Some people think that Groundhog Day is the ultimate recovery movie. And I think it's also the ultimate Step 10 movie, because until Bill Murray was able to take some inventory, he was stuck with the same thing, different day. Does that sound like alcohol and drug addiction to anybody? Does it sound like relationship addiction or like codependency? Have you ever had one of those days when somebody asked you, "What did you do today?" And you go, and you can't really explain what happened. You know you're busy all day. Well, Step 10 can help you with that. Have you ever felt like Bill Murray or Winnie the Pooh, stuck, not going anywhere, and don't feel like there's any way out? Well, Step 10 can help with that too. As I've been reflecting on Step 10 this month, I've started to realize just how powerful this step is and how much it can change my life. I used to think that Step 10 was just about figuring out if I had hurt anybody and if I needed to make an amends. But when I pulled my head out of that honey jar, I started to realize that there's far more to Step 10 than just figuring out who I have to make amends to. It's about trying to improve myself bit by bit, day by day. It involves accurate self-evaluation, self-awareness, and rigorous honesty. And it's not just for those of us in recovery, it's a step for everyone. Do you have the Socrates slide there? So good old Socrates takes a pretty harsh line and suggests that if we aren't introspective, our life isn't worth living. And I think Socrates had a bit of a flair for the dramatic, but he pretty clearly believes in the importance of self-examination. So let's take a quick show of hands. How many people here would like to continue to work on themselves? Looks like about half. So let me rephrase that. How many people here think that they've got it all figured out, that your life is perfect, and that you've arrived? Okay, let's do the first question again. So how many people would like to continue to work on themselves? There we go, thanks. So since I've been pondering Step 10 all month, I've got to thinking about the importance of continuing to take inventory and just what that could look like. As I said at the start of my recovery journey, I would just think about who I might have harmed and if I had any amends to do the next day. And I've realized that that way of working Step 10 for me is an easier, softer way. Now that I think about this step in more depth, I look at it more like a mini Step 4. Do I have resentments? Where have I been fearful, dishonest, inconsiderate, or selfish? Suddenly, instead of just quickly asking myself how I did today in general terms, I drill down a bit and things start to take on a new meaning. I always want to be a better person today than I was yesterday, but sometimes I'm not. But if I just accept the status quo and don't think about it and don't work on it, it'll never happen. I'm getting more serious about this step, and I understand that it could be a significant piece of changing my life for the better. Within this step lies the opportunity to improve my relationships, my work, my spirituality, my health, and my attitude. If I take out the part about making amends and focus on continuing to take personal inventory, and I put this into my daily routine on a deep basis, who knows what might happen? The 12 by 12 tells us that in doing our step 10, we need to guard against big shotism. That's our ego creeping back in. There's a lot more isms we have to guard against as well, and step 10 is a good step to do that with. How about judgmentalism? Have you ever gone to a meeting and listened to someone share, and in your head you had a running dialogue about everything he or she was saying that was wrong, or why they just wouldn't shut up? I have. Have you ever stood in the back alley or on the street after a meeting and complained about the chairperson or some other person in the meeting, or the coffee, or how crowded it was, or how few people they were there? I have. Have you ever gossiped about someone and how they aren't working their program, or their relapse, or their relationship issues, and then later on talked about the importance of only looking at your side of the street? I have. There's a beautiful piece of scripture about this, and it's from Matthew 7, verses 3 to 5. Jesus said, "Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." Here, Jesus is teaching about the importance of not judging other people, about not taking other people's inventory, and about doing our own work. He talks about the log in our own eye to illustrate the amount of work we have to do on ourselves before we dare judge someone else. It might take a lifetime to remove the log from our own eye. Let's look at our egos for a minute. Did you ever go to a meeting and while everybody was sharing, you were thinking about how brilliant you were going to be when you shared, and wrote and rewrote your share a dozen times in your head so you could dazzle everyone with your brilliance? And while you were doing that, you missed everything that everyone else shared? And then all of a sudden the meeting was over and you didn't get a chance to share? I have. So step 10 can be more than just looking to see if we need to make an amends. We can look at where we have been judgmental, where we have gossiped or taken other people's inventory, where we have let our egos get out of check, just to name a few. If I really want to change and improve daily, I have to go deeper than that. It's good to try and stop hurting people for sure, but there's so much more to this. I need to reflect on why it is I hurt people in the first place. Is it fear, selfishness, dishonesty, or being inconsiderate? Are there other reasons that I have to look at? Here are some of the things that I can look at when I do my step 10. Have I spent the day worrying about things and people that I have no control over? Because if I have, I've lost sight of step 3, that God's running the show and not me. Have I done a good job at my work today and given my employer or my clients the best that I have to give? Or have I been lazy and not really earned my pay? Have I been kind to people when I meet them, or too wrapped up in my own world to notice or to even give them time? Have I ignored a street person or crossed the street to avoid someone? Because if I have, I've lost sight of the teachings of Jesus. Have I truly cared when someone was talking to me, or been so busy thinking about what I was going to say or how I could escape? Have I ever let anger get in the way of my relationships and block me from my true feelings of pain and sadness and shame? Did I start my day in prayer, giving thanks for another day and the opportunity to make something more of my life and to help other people? Have I looked deep inside myself today to see where I could improve? And can I put my head on my pillow knowing that I will get a good night's sleep because I have tried today to be a better person than I was yesterday? If I can say yes to this question, then I have a good start on my step 10. Psalm 139 has a couple of verses which, while not directly related to me doing my inventory, they get me to thinking. Verses 23 and 24 say, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." It's a request that the psalmist puts to God, and one that for me requires a lot of courage. I know that God already knows my thoughts, and sometimes I'm not too proud of them. And while I know that God knows of my desire to please Him, my heart isn't always pure. And I know at times there are hurtful ways in me, both towards others and to myself. King David, the author of this psalm, knew the obvious, that his thoughts and his heart were not always in sync with God's will for his life. And so do I. I fall short of the mark every day. But if I ask God to lead me in the everlasting way, or to cleanse me of my shortcomings, He will. I just have to be honest about my shortcomings, open to God's will for me, and willing to do the work of introspection. Some people wonder why we have to keep doing this work, thinking they've already beat themselves up enough and that it's shaming. But that's not the point of it. It's about the need to know where you're at on a day-to-day basis, about establishing a baseline or a starting point. It's like going to the gym. If you want to be able to bench press 250 pounds like Peter and I do, you need to find your starting place. You need to figure out if you start with 100 pounds or 150 pounds. Then, let's say you get up to 200 pounds, but you miss a few weeks. You probably won't go back to the gym and press 200 pounds again until you put some work in. You need to be realistic and have a good evaluation of where you are at. And if you used to bench press 250 pounds a year ago, but you haven't been to the gym for a year, and somebody asks you how much you bench press, if you're being rigorously honest, you don't say 250 pounds. You have to continue to do the work, and that takes introspection and honesty. I posted a thought for the day on Wednesday, and I like the way that Clarence Day looks at self-awareness. He says, the test of a civilized person is first self-awareness, and then depth after depth of sincerity in self-confrontation. We get that self-awareness by deep introspection, personal inventories, if you will. Day uses the term self-confrontation, and I like that term. I need to confront myself about where I am lacking in order for me to make changes. We hear a lot about self-awareness and introspection, but not so much on self-confrontation. Most of us want to be self-aware because we know that it helps us. Some of us want to be introspective because that makes it sound like we're deep thinkers. But most of us avoid confrontation, and I suspect that it's the same with self-confrontation. So when I was researching, I Googled self-confrontation, and the search returned 1,260,000 results. And here's the definition that I found. Self-confrontation is a technique for behavior modification that depends on a person's recognition of and dissatisfaction with inconsistencies in his or her own values, beliefs, and behaviors. I think that that is what step 10 is about, behavior modification. It's not enough to be aware or introspective. It's not just enough to know ourselves. We have to change our behavior. Interestingly, most of the Google search results were of a biblical or spiritual nature. So self-confrontation is a spiritual practice. This is apparently such a big topic, and clearly not just for alcoholics and addicts, that there are even manuals to help you self-confront yourself, or help you to self-confront. I found one that suggests we might all need help in these areas. Having hope, peace, joy, and contentment in our hearts, preoccupation with ourselves, envy, jealousy, greed, anger and bitterness, interpersonal relationships including marriage and parent-child relationships, communication, forgiveness and reconciliation, fear and worry, life-dominating practices, and continuing growth. My point in all of this, and I do have one, is that step 10 is probably a lot bigger than we give it credit for, if we think beyond it just being about who we may have harmed that day. As Wayne said last week, it's about keeping short accounts with God, but I think it could be so much more. It could be a gateway to a more enriched and fulfilling life through more awareness, more introspection, and more self-confrontation. I don't know about you, but I need to move from being unconscious and unconsciously going through my day to being conscious. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." I think that step 10 can change that. Before I close, I'd like to go back to Winnie the Pooh. Pooh got his head stuck in the honey jar because of giving in to his insatiable desire for honey. Does that sound familiar? Pooh couldn't get his head out of his jar until he got a good smack upside a tree root, an immovable object. Does that sound familiar? The author of Winnie the Pooh, A. Milne, wrote, "Pooh was a bear of very little brain, so Pooh likely didn't do too much step 10 work. I doubt that he was very introspective or self-confrontational. As a result, not much ever changed in Pooh's life, and therefore he always kept going back to his honey. We are not bears of very little brain. So remember, it's never too late to start over. If you weren't happy with yesterday, try something different today. Don't stay stuck." Please join me in prayer. God, even though I want to get up each day saying "Good morning, Lord," instead of "Good Lord, morning," I sometimes don't. Even though my desire is to spend my first half hour each morning talking to you and listening for your voice, the voices in my head often take over, and I get busy and push you aside and don't get back to you until things go off the rails yet again. And even though it's my heart's desire to do the right thing and think the next right thought, I often do the opposite. And sometimes at night, when I truly want to do my step 10, I crawl into bed, tired from a day of doing it my way, with you nowhere in sight, and I fall asleep before I can even say thank you. God, I ask that you help me to put you at the center of my life, and that you help me to work at improving myself through my step 10. I ask that you help me to be patient with myself and realize that I am a work in progress, and that I need to keep working on myself daily. Grant me the courage to be self-aware, introspective, and self-confrontational. Help me, as the Apostle Paul says, to understand that when I've tried everything and nothing helps, and when he says, "Is there no one who can do anything for me?" the answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. Amen.